Captain Nyla Ralston glared at the swirling mess of the so-called cursed nebula from the viewport of her ship, the barely functional. The name was meant to be ironic, but like most things in her life, it turned out to be depressingly accurate. "Look at that," she muttered, adjusting her jacket for the third time that minute. "Giant cosmic blender. Just waiting to puree what's left of my sanity." The nebula was infamous for scrambling not just minds but entire personalities. Pilots had been known to fly in and come out as philosophers, poets, or worse, accountants. Nyla wasn't worried about losing her mind. She was more concerned about what she'd find if she went looking for it. Her first officer, a grizzled veteran named Slade, leaned against the control panel like it was the only thing holding him up. "I bet 3 credits this diplomatic summit will end in a brawl, just like last time." 3, that much faith in alien civility, huh? Nyla snorted. "I don't even think they have words for peaceful resolution. Or breath mint," Slade added, pinching his nose. "Some of these species smell like they bathe in rotten eggs." They were about to dock at the summit station, a relic from when space diplomacy was something more than a cosmic joke. The station hung in orbit around a dying star, which was fitting given the likelihood of anything productive happening here. Nyla felt the ship shudder as it latched onto the docking rings. "We're here," she announced. "Try not to die. Or worse, die of boredom." As they disembarked, Nyla took in the scene, a collection of aliens who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Some resembled walking cacti, others were a freaky blend of octopus and pufferfish, and then there was the leader of the coalition, a creature with more tentacles than the average nightmare. Its name was something unpronounceable, so everyone just called it Bob. "Welcome, Captain Ralston," Bob gurgled, its voice like a toilet backing up. "We're delighted to have a human representative." "Delighted my ass," Nyla whispered to Slade. Then louder, "The feeling's mutual, Bob. Shall we proceed to the conference chambers?" Bob gestured with a tentacle, leaving a trail of slime on the floor. "We have a rather pressing agenda. Can't wait," Nyla said, feigning enthusiasm. The truth was she'd rather be back on Earth, enduring another one of her mother's unsolicited matchmaking attempts. At least there she could drink. The conference chamber was as inviting as a tax audit, cold metal seats and a table that could double as an autopsy slab. Nyla took her place among the humans, a small cluster of Earthlings who'd managed to survive the long journey without killing each other. Barely. Bob started the meeting with the grace of a sledgehammer. "We have reviewed the human impact on the galaxy and have reached a decision." "Let me guess," Nyla interrupted. "You've discovered we're too charming, too witty, and too damn good-looking to resist." Bob's tentacles twitched, possibly a smile or a seizure. "Hardly. The Coalition has decided to implement a ban on human reproduction. You are, as you would say, too chaotic." "Chaotic," Slade barked a laugh. "Us. Have you met the lizard people who think war means hello, or the fungal folks who spread spores like confetti? This decision," Bob continued unfazed, "is for the greater good of galactic harmony." "Galactic harmony, my backside," Nyla muttered, tapping her fingers on the table. "More like galactic control." She looked around at the other humans, all showing varying degrees of shock, anger, and in one case, amusement. That last one was probably insane. The meeting devolved into what could generously be called a discussion, with representatives from other species chiming in about how much nicer humans would be if they just stopped existing. Nyla leaned back, letting the chaos unfold. There was a perverse satisfaction in watching the Coalition try to corral a bunch of argumentative, stubborn humans. Finally, Bob's gurgling voice cut through the noise. "If humanity cannot comply, there will be consequences." "Consequences," Nyla echoed. "What, you'll stop inviting us to your tea parties?" "Sanctions," Bob said ominously. "Possibly worse." Nyla knew what that meant. The Coalition had plenty of firepower, enough to make Earth's past wars look like schoolyard scuffles. She needed to think fast, find a way to keep humanity in the game without letting the Coalition steamroll them. "All right, Bob," she said, standing up. "We'll consider your suggestion, but don't expect us to roll over." "Of course," Bob replied, his voice dripping with smugness. "We expect nothing less." As Nyla and her crew left the chamber, Slade nudged her. "What now, Captain?" "Now, we find a way to make this work for us," she said, rubbing her temples. "Or at least find a way to make it their problem instead of ours." "That's the Nyla I know," Slade grinned. Optimistic as a guy with a paper umbrella in a hurricane. Back on the barely functional, Nyla slumped into the captain's chair. The ship's AI, a sarcastic piece of code named MAL, piped up. "How was the meeting? Did you solve galactic peace or just start another war?" "Neither, Mal," Nyla sighed. "Just got told we can't have babies anymore. Apparently we're too much trouble." "Well, they're not wrong," MAL quipped. "You humans can barely manage yourself, let alone offspring." "Thanks, Mal," Nyla said, rolling her eyes. "It's good to know my ship's AI has such faith in us. Only in your capacity to cause chaos," MAL replied, its voice saccharine with digital sarcasm. Nyla stared out into the nebula, its chaotic colors reflecting the turmoil inside her head. Being banned from reproducing was a blow, sure, but there had to be a way to turn this around. Humans were nothing if not resourceful. "We'll figure it out," she muttered, as much to herself as to anyone else. Slade, who had been rummaging through the ship's meager stash of booze, returned with 2 shot glasses and a bottle of something that looked like it might double as engine cleaner. "To humanity," he toasted, pouring the dubious liquid. "To humanity," Nyla echoed, clinking her glass against his. The drink burned all the way down, which was a relief. At least something was still predictable. As they sat in the half-light of the control room, the vastness of space all around, Nyla felt the weight of their situation settle like an unwanted guest. The Coalition's ban was more than just an inconvenience. It was a threat to their existence, their very future. "We won't let them get away with this," Nyla vowed, her voice steely despite the alcohol. Slade nodded, his expression one of grim determination. "Damn right, they picked the wrong species to push around." The nebula outside pulsed with eerie light, a reminder of the unpredictable universe they lived in. But Nyla and her crew were ready, willing to fight for humanity's place among the stars. "Let's give him hell," Nyla said, her eyes burning with defiance. And somewhere in the depths of space, a new chapter in humanity's story was about to be written, one that promised to be as chaotic and unpredictable as the species itself. Captain Nyla Ralston was nursing what she hoped was just a headache, and not the onset of whatever cosmic insanity the cursed nebula liked to dole out for laughs. Her ship, the ironically named Barely Functional, was currently orbiting Summit Station, a rust bucket that made her own vessel look like a luxury yacht. The nebula's colorful chaos spilled through the ship's viewport like a bad acid trip. "So, any new symptoms of cosmic derangement today, Captain?" Slade asked, plopping down in the co-pilot's seat and tossing a data slate onto the panel. "Besides the usual existential dread, of course. Just a splitting headache and a growing desire to strangle something with tentacles," Nyla replied, rubbing her temples. "Which, given our current company, is not ideal. Yeah, it'd be like punching a bowl of spaghetti. Satisfying, but ultimately pointless." Nyla smirked despite herself. "We should check on Theo. Last I saw, he was attempting to invent a cocktail that won't corrode human organs." "Inventing, or testing on himself?" Slade asked, raising an eyebrow. "With Theo, it's a 50-50 shot either way. Dr. Theo Vance was, in Nyla's estimation, either a genius or a madman, possibly both. The ship's resident scientist had a penchant for explosive results, literally. The last time he'd tried to enhance the ship's fuel efficiency, the ensuing fireball had singed Nyla's eyebrows and her patience. In the cramped lab that doubled as Theo's living quarters, the air was thick with the scent of something acrid and probably toxic. Theo stood hunched over a makeshift bar, surrounded by an array of dubious-looking liquids. His hair looked like it had been styled by a lightning bolt, which was likely the case. "Ah, Captain," Theo exclaimed with a manic grin. "Care to try the latest batch? I call it the Nebula Screwdriver, guaranteed to either blow your mind or just blow up." "I think I'll pass," Nyla said dryly. "How's your head? The nebula messing with your wiring yet?" Theo laughed, a sound that could only be described as unhinged. "Oh, the nebula, just a mild tickle, but I've always been a bit scrambled upstairs, so it's hard to tell the difference." "Always nice to have consistency," Slade remarked, eyeing a flask that was bubbling ominously. "What's the plan if you accidentally mix bleach and ammonia there?" Theo waved a dismissive hand. "Please, I'm a professional. Besides, I prefer the term innovative chaos." "Speaking of chaos," Nyla interjected, "our friends in the Coalition think we're too unpredictable to let our species continue. Got any genius plans to convince them otherwise?" Theo tapped his chin thoughtfully, then shrugged. "Well, we could try being boring for a change, but where's the fun in that?" Nyla rolled her eyes. "Great, so we're doomed." "Thanks, Doc." Just then the ship's intercom crackled to life, spewing static like a radio possessed by a poltergeist. After some unintelligible gibberish, a voice, smooth as a politician's promise, came through. "Captain Ralston, this is Draxel from the Coalition Diplomatic Corps. Might I have a word?" Nyla exchanged a look with Slade. "Oh joy, diplomatic tension." "My favorite," she muttered before hitting the intercom. "This is Ralston. What's the issue, Draxel?" A brief pause, then Draxel's voice slithered through again. "I believe we have a misunderstanding about the Coalition's intentions. It would be most beneficial to discuss this in person." "Beneficial for whom?" Nyla replied, skepticism leaking from her words like oil from a rust bucket. "For all parties involved, I assure you," Draxel said, his voice syrupy with faux concern. "All right, we'll meet you at the station, but if you try anything sketchy, I reserve the right to introduce your face to my boot." Draxel chuckled, a sound that made Nyla's skin crawl. "Understood, Captain. I look forward to our meeting." Nyla cut the connection and stood, straightening her jacket as if preparing for battle. "Slade, Theo, you're with me." Let's go see what our slippery friend wants. Summit Station, as always, was a marvel of outdated technology and questionable structural integrity. The air hung heavy with the scent of desperation and recycled everything. Nyla led the way through the labyrinthine corridors, Slade and Theo flanking her like bodyguards in a low-budget action flick. They found Draxel in a room that passed for a lounge, though the decor was closer to abandoned warehouse chic. The alien diplomat was tall, lanky, with skin the color of spoiled milk and eyes that seemed to pierce through to the soul, or at least the pocketbook. Captain Ralston, Draxel greeted, his smile as genuine as a 3-credit bill. "A pleasure," Draxel, Nyla said, nodding curtly. "You said something about a misunderstanding." "Indeed." Draxel gestured for them to sit, tentacles arranging chairs with surprising grace. "The Coalition's recent decision has been alarming to your people. I wanted to clarify that it is not an outright ban on reproduction, but rather a temporary pause." "Temporary? How long are we talking?" Slade asked, folding his arms across his chest. Draxel waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, just a millennium or two, barely a blip in cosmic terms," Theo snorted. "Right, because who doesn't love a good 2,000-year dry spell?" Nyla fixed Draxel with a hard stare. "Why now, Draxel? What exactly makes us so terrifying?" The diplomat leaned back, steepling his hands in a move that was likely rehearsed. "Your unpredictability, Captain. Your species thrives in chaos, adapts to impossible situations. It's unsettling." "Unsettling?" Nyla echoed incredulously. "We built a civilization out of mud and bad decisions. What's more unsettling than a giant squid with diplomatic ambitions?" "Touché," Draxel conceded, "but consider the Coalition's perspective. Humans are the wild card that upsets the delicate balance we've maintained." Theo leaned forward, uncharacteristically serious. "So what you're saying is you're scared. Scared that we'll do something you didn't plan for." Draxel's smile thinned. "Cautious, Dr. Vance. Cautious of the unforeseen." "Well, that's a comforting euphemism," Nyla muttered. "So what's your proposal? Or did you just want to practice your diplomatic double talk?" "I'm here to extend an olive branch, Captain," Draxel replied, all smiles again. "If we can establish a framework for human conduct, perhaps the Coalition can reassess its stance." Slade rolled his eyes. "Yeah, a framework for conduct. Because we're known for sticking to the rules." Nyla considered Draxel's words, her mind a whirlwind of possibilities and pitfalls. The Coalition's fear was an opportunity, a lever they could use to shift the balance back in their favor. But playing by their rules was a gamble, one that could cost them more than they were willing to pay. "All right, Draxel," she said finally. "We'll play your game. But don't expect us to fold." Draxel inclined his head, a smug smile playing at the corners of his lips. "I would expect nothing less." As they made their way back to the ship, Nyla mulled over the conversation with Draxel. The Coalition's fear of human unpredictability was both a curse and a weapon. If they could harness it, turn the tables on their would-be overseers, then maybe, just maybe, they could secure humanity's future. "Think we can pull it off, Captain?" Theo asked as they stepped onto the barely functional. Nyla shrugged, a wry smile tugging at her lips. "If we can't, at least we'll make one hell of a mess trying." Slade clapped her on the shoulder. "That's the spirit, Captain. Let's show them what unpredictable really means." As Nyla settled into the captain's chair, a strange sense of calm washed over her. The nebula outside still swirled with chaotic energy, but inside she felt a renewed sense of purpose. They might be living in uncertain times, but they were far from defeated. "All right, Mal," Nyla called to the ship's AI. "Prep us for departure. We've got a galaxy to confuse." "Copy that, Captain," Mal replied, its voice a mix of sarcasm and digital cheer. Executing confused mode. As the barely functional drifted away from Summit Station, the starry expanse stretched out before them, full of danger, opportunity, and the promise of the unknown. It was a challenge Nyla and her crew were more than ready to face head-on. And somewhere deep in the heart of the cursed nebula, a plan was forming, a plan to ensure that humanity's story would continue, no matter the odds stacked against them. Back on the barely functional, Captain Nyla Ralston sat in the cockpit, her headache simmering beneath the surface like a ticking time bomb. The cursed nebula's influence was like a cosmic hangover that even the strongest coffee couldn't cure. Her crew was resilient, mostly because they had to be, but the nebula was starting to gnaw at the edges of their patience and sanity. Slade, seated beside her, was fiddling with the ship's navigation system like it was a puzzle with missing pieces. "You ever think the universe is just one big joke and we're the punchline?" he asked, his tone as dry as the recycled air they were breathing. Nyla smirked. "Given our luck, I'm starting to suspect the universe's sense of humor is about as sophisticated as a toddler with a hammer." "Well, if we're the joke, we might as well be the ones laughing," Slade replied, tapping a button that made the console emit a noise reminiscent of a dying animal. Nyla grimaced and turned her attention to the swirling chaos outside. The nebula's colors were dizzying, a kaleidoscope of cosmic insanity that refused to stay still. It was beautiful, in a way that made you want to gouge your eyes out. Meanwhile, down in the bowels of the ship, Theo was conducting yet another one of his experiments. The lab was a mess of wires, beakers, and half-baked ideas. He claimed he was working on a way to counteract the nebula's effects. Nyla suspected he was just one bad idea away from blowing them all sky-high. "Theo, what's the latest?" Nyla asked over the intercom, bracing herself for whatever madness he was concocting. "Well, Captain," Theo replied, his voice crackling through the static, "I've been mixing a cocktail of neurostabilizers and anti-nausea meds. If my calculations are right, it might just stabilize our brain chemistry, or turn us into drooling zombies," Slade interjected, his skepticism dripping like molasses. Theo chuckled in that unsettling way of his. "Come on, where's your sense of adventure? Besides, what have we got to lose? Our remaining brain cells," Slade shot back. Nyla rubbed her temples, the nebula's effects a constant throb in her skull. "Theo, just don't blow us up before dinner, all right?" "No promises, Captain," Theo replied cheerfully, "but I'll do my best." Nyla cut the connection, sighing heavily. Sometimes she wondered if they were all just flies caught in the web of some cosmic prank, but they had a mission and giving up wasn't an option, not when there was so much at stake. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed movement, something skittering in the shadows at the edge of the cockpit. Her hand instinctively went to her sidearm, adrenaline spiking through her veins. "Did you see that?" she asked, keeping her voice low. Slade looked up, his gaze following hers. "See what?" The existential dread creeping up on us. "Something's on the ship," Nyla insisted, her voice tense. "And I don't mean Theo's experiments." "Great," Slade said, standing up and stretching as if he'd just been handed a particularly boring chore. "Just what we needed, an uninvited guest." They moved through the ship, checking corners and peeking into storage compartments with the air of people who had seen it all before but weren't any happier for it. The barely functional was a maze of poorly lit corridors and questionable engineering, ideal for hiding things or losing your sanity. A sudden clatter came from the engine room, and Nyla's heart skipped a beat. She motioned for Slade to follow her lead, creeping forward with the kind of caution that came from experience rather than training. Inside, they found a creature, an alien agent, judging by its spindly limbs and the device it was fiddling with near the reactor core. It was a sorry sight, looking like a cross between a spider and a disgruntled accountant. Nyla had seen prettier things crawl out of Theo's waste bin. "Hey, bug," Nyla called out, pointing her gun at the creature. "You lost or just suicidal?" The alien turned, its face a mosaic of panic and confusion. I was sent to ensure that humanity doesn't interfere," it stammered, the universal translator struggling with its whining voice. "Interfere with what?" Slade asked, eyes narrowing. "Our own destruction." "No, the Coalition's plans," the alien squeaked. "You are too unpredictable." "They fear you?" Nyla exchanged a glance with Slade, her expression a mixture of amusement and exasperation. "Yeah, we got that memo. But listen, if you blow up our ship, we're not going to be very unpredictable, are we?" The alien hesitated, its many eyes blinking asynchronously. I hadn't thought of that." "Clearly," Slade said dryly, stepping forward. "Why don't you put down whatever you're doing before you create a bigger mess than Theo's last experiment?" The alien nodded, its limbs trembling as it gingerly set the device on the floor. Nyla kept her gun trained on it, not trusting for a second that it would play nice. "So, what's your name, pal?" Nyla asked, lowering her weapon just enough to seem a tiny bit less intimidating. "I am called Virixil," the alien replied, its voice a thin whine. "I was only following orders." "Aren't we all?" Nyla muttered, reholstering her gun. "All right, Virixil, I'm feeling charitable. How about we forget you tried to blow us up and you forget you ever saw us?" Virixil bobbed its head, relief flooding its features. Yes, that sounds agreeable." "Good," Nyla said, nodding to Slade. "Slade, escort our guest to the nearest airlock and make sure it finds its way out." Slade clapped Virixil on the back, the alien flinching at the contact. "Come on, buddy. Let's get you on your way before you become the barbecued special." As Slade and Virixil departed, Nyla returned to the cockpit, her mind a whirl of thoughts. The Coalition's fear of human unpredictability was becoming more tangible, more dangerous, but it also meant they were getting under the Coalition's skin. That was something they could use to their advantage. The nebula continued its cosmic dance outside, but Nyla felt a spark of hope amid the chaos. They had an edge, a way to turn the tables. But they needed a plan, a real one, not just flying by the seat of their pants. She called Theo back on the intercom. "Doc, how's that concoction of yours coming along?" "Still in the development phase," Theo replied, sounding far too chipper for someone who might end up poisoning his entire crew. "But I've got a good feeling about it." "Great. We might need it sooner rather than later," Nyla said. "The Coalition's sending agents to mess with our heads. We need to stay sharp." "Understood, Captain," Theo responded with a sincerity that was rare for him. "I'll speed up the process. No promises on the taste, though. Just make sure it doesn't kill us," Nyla said with a wry smile. As she sat back, the nebula's colors reflecting off the cockpit's worn surfaces, Nyla felt a renewed determination. The effects of the nebula were getting worse, the Coalition's paranoia was ramping up, and now they had a saboteur problem. But they also had each other and the unpredictability that made humanity so feared. Slade returned, looking slightly more relaxed. Our guest is on a one-way trip out. Hopefully, it doesn't send us any postcards. Good, Nyla said, nodding. We're going to need all hands on deck for what's coming next. Slade grinned, the kind of grin that had gotten them into trouble more times than Nyla cared to count. You thinking of something crazy, Captain? Always, Nyla replied, her smile turning into a wicked grin. Let's show them what unpredictable really means. As they prepared for their next move, Nyla couldn't shake the feeling that they were a long way from home, both figuratively and literally. But as long as they had their wits, their humor, and a little bit of madness, they stood a fighting chance. The barely functional continued its journey through the nebula, a beacon of defiance in a universe that seemed determined to keep them down. But Nyla and her crew were ready for whatever came next, and they weren't going down without a fight. After all, if they couldn't outgun their enemies, they'd just have to outthink them. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. Nyla Ralston slouched back in her captain's chair, squinting at the cracked screen of her console as if staring hard enough might magically fix everything. Well, gentlemen, she drawled, seems we're not just the universe's favorite joke, but we've also been voted most likely to be screwed over by the Coalition. Slade gave a snort from his station, tapping furiously at the navigation controls. We should get a trophy or something. Maybe a nice plaque that says, "Congratulations, you're now officially a cosmic punching bag," or a mug that reads, "World's Worst Respected Species." Nyla leaned forward, glancing at the swirling nightmare of colors outside. The nebula was doing its best to remind them that sanity was for people who didn't live in space. Captain, Doctor. Theo Vance cut in over the intercom, and his voice carried the restrained excitement of a man who was probably one good experiment away from blowing up the ship. I've got something. Please tell me it's a plan to make the universe not hate us, Slade mumbled, not looking up. I wish it were that simple, Theo replied, with the tone of someone who had long ago accepted that life was one long series of bad jokes. But I think I've managed to stabilize a neurostabilizer. It might buy us some time against the nebula's effects, or it could turn us into vegetable soup, Slade added helpfully. Optimism, Slade, I love it, keep it coming, Theo said cheerfully. But really, what's the worst that could happen? Don't tempt fate, Theo, Nyla interjected. Fate's got a wicked sense of humor and a lot of free time. Meanwhile, the ship's lights flickered, as if agreeing with Nyla's sentiment. The barely functional was living up to its name, reminding everyone aboard that a bucket of scrap metal in the void was about as safe as a paper boat in a hurricane. All right, Theo, Nyla said, her voice taking on a serious edge, get that cocktail ready. But no one's testing it until we know it's safe. I'd like to keep my brain unfried, thanks very much. Understood, Captain, Theo replied, the sound of bubbling liquids and faint explosions underscoring his words. As Nyla clicked off the intercom, Slade turned to her with a raised eyebrow. Do you think he actually knows what he's doing? Slade, if I worried about that, I'd never sleep, Nyla replied, her expression glum. Besides, it's Theo. He's like a mad scientist without the evil plan. That's reassuring, Slade said, returning to his console. A mad scientist who's on our side. Nyla stretched, feeling the tension in her shoulders, her brain throbbing in sync with the ship's failing systems. Let's focus on the task at hand. The Coalition isn't just playing games, they're scared, and scared people do stupid things. Like us, flying through this nebula, Slade deadpanned. Exactly, the barely functional shuddered, a sound of ominous groaning echoing through the hull. Nyla winced. I swear if this ship had a voice, it would just scream help all the time. Or why me, Slade added. Right. Let's get ahead of this mess before we find ourselves smeared across the galaxy. While Slade continued to fiddle with the navigation, Nyla's thoughts turned to the Coalition's agenda. Reproduction bans and now agents trying to sabotage them. There was more to this story, a deeper layer of idiocy that she needed to peel back. Slade, I need you to dig into Coalition communications, Nyla ordered. Find out what they're hiding. Maybe they've got a dirty little secret that'll shine a light on this circus. You got it, Slade replied, already pulling up the ship's clunky, ancient data interface. Let's see if we can find something that makes them squirm. And if you find the universe's manual on how to not screw everything up, let me know, Nyla added with a wry smile. That's in the fiction section, Slade shot back, tapping away with a focus that belied his sarcasm. As Slade delved into data streams, Nyla decided a visit to the lab was in order. She needed to see Theo's madcap lab for herself. It wasn't just curiosity, it was self-preservation. Knowing Theo, his latest concoction could end up being a very short-lived miracle or a very long-lived disaster. The lab was a chaos of wires, tubes, and questionable liquids, most of which looked like they belonged in a horror movie rather than a spaceship. Theo was hunched over a table, goggles perched precariously on his forehead, mixing something that fizzed alarmingly. "Please tell me you're not about to accidentally create a new life form," Nyla said, leaning against the doorway with feigned nonchalance. Theo glanced up, a manic grin on his face. "Captain, perfect timing. I was just about to test our new brain juice." "Brain juice, catchy," Nyla said, crossing her arms. "And you're sure it won't turn us into mindless zombies?" "No more than usual," Theo replied, shrugging. "But seriously, I've run simulations. It's stable, well, mostly." "Mostly stable," Nyla echoed, raising an eyebrow. "You really know how to inspire confidence, Doc," Theo chuckled, giving the concoction one last stir. "Think of it as a vaccination, a little madness to ward off a lot of madness." "Let's hope it works," Nyla said, though she couldn't help but smile at Theo's infectious enthusiasm. "The Coalition's sending saboteurs, and I'd rather not have a mutiny on my hands. Speaking of which," Theo said, suddenly serious, "I've been monitoring the nebula's influence. It's accelerating. We're on borrowed time." Nyla felt a pang of anxiety, masked by her usual bravado. "Then we better hurry before we're all gibbering wrecks." Theo nodded, returning to his work with renewed energy. "I'll have this ready for testing soon." Nyla left the lab, the corridors of the barely functional feeling more confining than ever. The ship was a rickety lifeline in a sea of cosmic chaos, but it was her lifeline, damn it, and she wasn't going to let it go down without a fight. Back on the bridge, Slade was waiting, his expression a mix of triumph and disbelief. "Captain, you're gonna love this. Found some juicy tidbits in Coalition chatter." "Juicy as in finally something makes sense." Nyla crossed the room, leaning over his shoulder. "Juicy as in these idiots are scared of us for a reason," Slade replied, gesturing at the screen. "Turns out, there's a faction within the Coalition that's downright terrified of human potential. They're worried we might out-evolve them." Nyla let out a low whistle. "So that's why they're panicking." "Yeah, they've got this theory that humans, given enough time and without restrictions, could surpass them in ways they can't control. Hence the reproduction bans and mysterious agents. Wouldn't be the first time we've scared the pants off someone," Nyla said with a grin. "And I thought our biggest problem was paying off our bar tab at Summit Station." "Nice to know we're feared," Slade quipped. "I'd rather be feared than ignored." Nyla straightened, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. "All right, we've got leverage. Let's use it. If they're scared of what we might become, then we've got a bargaining chip, or a reason for them to double down on making us all extinct," Slade pointed out. "True, but we've got an element of surprise and a hefty dose of unpredictability," Nyla said, determination hardening her voice. "That's our edge. Let's get ready to exploit it." The ship shuddered again, and Nyla swore under her breath. "First, though, we need to make sure our brain juice doesn't turn us into drooling morons." "Always a good plan," Slade agreed, his fingers flying over the keys. "I'll keep digging." "Maybe there's more dirt we can use." Nyla nodded, her mind racing. They were up against a coalition that feared them, a nebula that was eating away at their sanity, and a ship that was on the verge of falling apart. But they weren't out of the game, not yet. "Let's gear up, Slade. We're going to need all hands on deck for this one," Nyla said, her voice tinged with the kind of grim humor that had become second nature. "And if Theo's concoction gives us superpowers, even better. Here's hoping," Slade said, smiling as he focused on his task. As Nyla returned to her seat, she allowed herself a rare moment of hope. They'd been dealt a bad hand, sure, but that didn't mean they couldn't bluff their way to victory. The Coalition might fear them, but they hadn't seen what a desperate crew on a barely functional ship could do. The barely functional was more than just a ship. It was a testament to human stubbornness, a metal beacon against the void's indifference. And if the Coalition thought they could outsmart humanity, they were in for a rude awakening. Nyla Ralston was going to make sure of it. With her crew, her ship, and a little luck, they'd show the universe that humanity wasn't a species to be trifled with. And if they had to go down, they'd go down laughing. Nyla Ralston leaned back in her chair, her eyes fixed on the swirling nightmare of colors outside the ship. The cursed nebula, always there, always waiting to turn them all into blithering idiots. It was like watching a cosmic lava lamp, just with a higher probability of insanity. "Captain got a transmission from Summit Station," Slade said, pulling her back into the grim reality of their situation. "Seems Bob and his tentacle brigade are trying to reach us." "Great. Just what I needed, tentacle diplomacy," Nyla muttered. "Put them on." The screen flickered to life, and there was Bob, looking like a particularly disgruntled octopus in a bad mood. His tentacles flailed around like a kid throwing a tantrum in zero gravity. "Captain Ralston," Bob started, his voice oozing with condescension, which was impressive considering how his species lacked vocal cords. "The Coalition's patience is wearing thin. Good to know. I'll knit them a new pair," Nyla replied, crossing her arms. "What's the crisis of the Ior?" Bob's tentacles twitched, a sure sign he was about to dump a load of bureaucratic nonsense on her. Your presence in the nebula is problematic. The Coalition demands you return to Summit Station immediately. Failure to comply will result in, let me guess, a sternly worded letter," Nyla interrupted, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Bob, do us all a favor and spare the threats." "We're not exactly in the mood," Slade snorted, earning a glare from Bob's many eyes. "Captain, you're in violation of multiple interstellar agreements. This isn't a joke. Nothing's a joke with you folks, is it?" Nyla shot back. "We're dealing with a mind-scrambling nebula, a ship that might fall apart any minute, and now your Coalition's power struggle." "I'd say we've got our hands full." Bob's image wavered, clearly not satisfied with her cavalier attitude. "Captain, I urge you to reconsider. The nebula is a threat to all conscious life." "Yes, so's a hangover, but we manage," Nyla replied with a dismissive wave. "Look, Bob, we're working on it. Tell your bosses to hold their horses, or whatever tentacle equivalent you've got." With that, Nyla cut the transmission, leaving the bridge in silence, save for the ever-present hum of the ship's struggling engines. "Think he got the message?" Slade asked, half smirking. "Maybe, but don't hold your breath," Nyla said, rubbing her temples. "Bob's got the patience of a saint and the IQ of a rock. Remind me why we haven't just cut ties with these Coalition clowns," Slade asked, leaning back in his chair. "Because they'd retaliate by sending every tin can they've got after us," Nyla replied. "And I'd rather avoid getting vaporized today." She turned her attention back to the nebula, her thoughts a chaotic whirl. The Coalition was panicking, and that made them dangerous. But the nebula, now that was another beast entirely. Its influence was growing, gnawing at their mental defenses like a particularly determined termite. "Let's get a status update from Theo," Nyla decided, getting to her feet. "If that brain juice isn't ready soon, we're going to be in trouble." Slade nodded, his face set in a rare expression of genuine concern. "I'll keep poking around Coalition channels. Maybe there's more dirt we can use." Nyla headed back to the lab, each step feeling like a trek through molasses. The barely functional might just live up to its name if they didn't find a solution soon. The lab's door slid open to reveal Theo, surrounded by a cloud of what Nyla hoped was steam and not the precursor to an explosion. He looked up, goggles askew, and grinned like a kid who'd just found the key to the candy store. "Captain, just in time," Theo announced, holding up a vial of something that looked disturbingly like neon coolant. "Behold our salvation." "Salvation in a bottle, huh?" Nyla eyed the concoction warily. "And it won't turn us into vegetables, you promise?" Theo nodded enthusiastically. "I've triple-checked the formula. It's stable and the side effects are minimal. You might feel a slight tingling, but that's just the neurons firing up." "Sounds delightful," Nyla replied, sarcasm lacing her voice. "Let's hope it's enough." Theo handed her the vial, and Nyla hesitated only a moment before taking it. If this was what stood between them and a psychotic break, she'd have to trust Theo's mad science. "Here's to not losing our minds," Nyla said, raising the vial in a mock toast before downing it in one go. The liquid burned slightly, but as Theo promised, there was a tingling sensation that was almost pleasant. "How long until we know if it works?" Nyla asked, setting the empty vial down. Theo shrugged, a gesture that was far from reassuring. "Could be immediate, could take a few minutes. I've calibrated it to counteract the nebula's effects, but the real test is how it holds up under stress." "Under stress?" Nyla repeated, her stomach nodding. "Theo, our lives are one long stress test." "Exactly, which makes us perfect candidates," Theo said with a cheery nod. Nyla sighed, shaking her head. "Let's hope this isn't the universe's way of thinning the herd." As she left the lab, Nyla couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope mixed with dread. Theo's concoction might be their saving grace, or it might be the last nail in their coffin. Either way, it was their only shot. Back on the bridge, Slade was waiting with a grim expression. "Captain, we've got company." "Define company," Nyla said, joining him at the console. "Coalition ships, a lot of them," Slade replied, his voice tight. "They've formed a blockade outside the nebula." Nyla swore under her breath. "They're not giving us much of a choice, are they?" "Nope. And they've sent a message, return to Summit Station or be considered hostile," Slade said, running a hand through his hair. "They really want us out of here," Nyla muttered, her mind racing. The Coalition wasn't just panicking, they were desperate, and desperate people did stupid things. "Captain, what's the plan?" Slade asked, his usual sarcasm absent. This was serious. Nyla leaned back, her eyes narrowing as she considered their options. "We need to buy time. If we head back now, we lose all leverage, but staying means playing chicken with a fleet." "We're good at chicken," Slade pointed out. "It's the whole not dying part that's tricky." "True," Nyla agreed, a plan forming in her mind. "All right, here's what we're gonna do. Send a message back to the Coalition. Tell them we're dealing with a critical ship malfunction and need time to fix it." Slade raised an eyebrow. "You think they'll buy it?" "They better," Nyla replied, a steely edge in her voice. "And make sure to emphasize the potential danger of us leaving the nebula without stabilizing the systems." "Got it," Slade said, typing rapidly. And Slade, Nyla added, prepare to engage the jump drive if things go south. We need to be ready to run. Running's what we do best, Slade agreed, his fingers never stopping. Nyla sat back, her mind a tempest of calculations and contingencies. They were cornered but not out. The coalition might have them in a vice, but if they played this right, they could turn the tables. The minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. Finally, Slade looked up, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. Message sent, now we wait. Waiting's my favorite, Nyla said dryly. Almost as much fun as root canals. The ship's systems hummed around them, the ever-present reminder of their precarious situation. If Theo's brain juice held up, if the coalition bought their bluff, if the universe had even a shred of mercy left, then maybe, just maybe, they'd come out of this alive. Captain, Slade said, breaking the silence, what do we do if they call our bluff? We hope they're as incompetent as we think, Nyla replied, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. And if not, we fight like hell. Slade nodded, the determination in his eyes mirroring her own. They were in this together, for better or for worse. A crew of misfits on a ship held together by hope, spit, and a dash of lunacy. As the coalition ships loomed in the distance, Nyla couldn't help but laugh. It was a dark, hollow sound, but it was hers. At least we'll go down fighting, she said, a grim smile playing on her lips. Or laughing, Slade added, grinning despite the odds. Yeah, Nyla agreed, her heart pounding with a reckless courage. Or laughing, and in the shadow of the nebula, with the universe stacked against them, they prepared to do both. Nyla stood on the bridge, staring out at the colorful chaos of the nebula. It was a beauty that might have inspired poets if it weren't for its tendency to make people gibbering idiots. The coalition blockade loomed like a storm on the horizon, ready to rain on anyone's parade, especially hers. Captain, Slade called, breaking her reverie. We've got an incoming transmission from the coalition flagship. Nyla turned, raising an eyebrow. Let me guess, another invitation to the Shut Up and Comply Club. Pretty much, Slade replied with a wry grin. This time they've sent Admiral Doncaster himself. Ah, the coalition's very own scarecrow. Let's see what he's got, Nyla said, bracing for another round of bureaucratic nonsense. The screen flickered to life, revealing Admiral Doncaster in all his uniformed glory. He looked like someone had stuffed a scarecrow into a military uniform and told it to frown a lot. Captain Ralston, Doncaster began, his voice a mix of boredom and authority. You are in direct violation of coalition protocols. This is your final warning. Nyla leaned against her console, adopting her best I really don't care pose. Admiral, lovely to see you. I hear you're quite the hit at parties. The coalition is not amused by your antics, Captain, Doncaster said, his eyes narrowing. Return to Summit Station immediately, or we will take action. Oh, I'm quivering in my boots, really, Nyla replied, feigning a yawn. How many ships have you got out there? 20, 30, I've lost count. 35 to be precise, Doncaster said, puffing up with pride. Well, aren't you popular? Nyla shot back. Listen, Admiral, we've got a little situation here. Ship's not exactly spaceworthy at the moment. So running is out, unless you want me to crash into one of your shiny ships. Doncaster's frown deepened. You have one ire, Ralston, one ire, or we consider you hostile. Nyla cut the transmission with a dismissive wave. One ire, huh? That's generous, like giving a guy a minute to defuse a bomb. Guess we're on a timer now, Slade said, his tone lighter than the situation warranted. What's the plan, Cap? Nyla chewed her lip, her mind racing. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was turning desperation into an advantage. All right, she said, standing up straight. Here's the play, we mess with their heads. Slade blinked. Mess with their heads. We've got 35 ships out there, Nyla. That's a lot of heads to mess with. Exactly, Nyla replied, her mind working double time. The nebula's scrambling our brains, right? We use that to our advantage. Get Theo on the comms. His brain juice might just be the key. Slade nodded, punching buttons on the console. Theo's face appeared on the monitor, goggles still perched on his forehead like an overzealous headband. Captain. How's the juice treating you? Theo asked, his enthusiasm infectious despite the circumstances. Holding up so far, Nyla said. Theo, I need you to up the dosage and pump it through the ship's ventilation. We need to turn this whole place into a neurostabilizing fog machine. Interesting, Theo mused, a gleam in his eye. Counteract the nebula's effects across the entire crew. But what's the endgame? We're going to pretend it's doing the opposite, Nyla explained with a grin. Make them think we're losing our minds. If they believe we're about to go off the deep end, they might back off. Theo's grin widened. I like it. Mad as a hatter routine. Should be easy given our current mental states. Exactly. Get it done, and let's make sure we've got the broadcasting tech ready. We're gonna need to sell this. I'm on it, Captain, Theo said, hands already moving with purpose. Nyla turned back to Slade. Start recording. I want the coalition to see us coming apart at the seams. We're gonna fake a meltdown? Slade asked, amusement dancing in his eyes. Yep, Nyla replied. Let's give them a show they won't forget. As the ship's systems whirred to life, pumping Theo's concoction through every vent, Nyla took a deep breath. This was risky, bordering on lunacy, but when had sanity ever been their strong suit? Broadcasting in 3, 2, 1, Slade said, hitting the switch. Nyla plastered on her best losing-it smile and started pacing the bridge, talking loudly to herself about space rabbits and the futility of existence. Slade joined in, babbling about the existential dread of toothpaste tubes, and soon the bridge was a cacophony of chaos. "Captain, I can't find my shoes," Slade yelled, holding up two mismatched boots. "They're in the fourth dimension," Nyla shouted back, waving her arms like a conductor of a very strange orchestra. The screen flickered, showing the faces of Coalition officers watching their antics in horror. Admiral Doncaster looked particularly constipated, a vein throbbing in his forehead. "Captain Ralston, what on earth are you doing?" Doncaster demanded, his voice a mix of anger and confusion. "Earth, what's that?" "I've never heard of it," Nyla cackled, spinning in her chair. "We're all made of star stuff, didn't you know?" Doncaster's expression morphed into one of disbelief. "This is madness, madness," Nyla echoed, feigning shock. "This is the nebula," Slade snorted, barely keeping a straight face. "Captain, I think the ship's trying to talk to me." "Tell it I'm busy," Nyla replied, waving her hands dismissively. The Coalition officers murmured amongst themselves, uncertainty rippling through their ranks. They hadn't expected this. "Good. Admiral," a voice piped up, "if they're truly affected by the nebula, engaging them could cause unpredictable results." Doncaster's face twisted in frustration. "We can't just let them sit there, then come over for tea," Nyla chirped, pulling faces at the screen. "We've got cosmic biscuits." A few officers stifled laughter, and even Doncaster looked like he was questioning his career choices. "Captain Ralston," Doncaster growled, "you're pushing it. Push it real good," Nyla sang, dancing in her chair. "Admiral, you're welcome to join the party anytime." The screen went blank, and Nyla sagged back into her chair, the exhaustion of the charade catching up to her. "Think it worked?" Slade asked, his voice tinged with hope. "Well," Nyla said, her normal tone returning, "we've bought some time. Theo's mist should keep us stable while they decide what to do." Slade nodded, his face thoughtful. "If they believe we're truly compromised, they'll hesitate to engage. No one wants to be the guy who shoots first when it might not be necessary." "Exactly," Nyla agreed, rubbing her temples. "We've turned their fear against them." Classic misdirection. Theo's voice crackled over the comms. "Captain, neurostabilizer level is holding steady. We're safe for now, but it won't last forever." "Understood," Nyla replied. "Keep monitoring it. We'll need every edge we can get." As the minutes ticked on, Nyla's mind churned with potential outcomes. They'd bought time, but the Coalition wouldn't stay spooked for long. They'd regroup, reevaluate, and come at them again. "Captain," Slade said, breaking her thoughts, "we might have a problem. Looks like one of their ships is moving in." Nyla shot him a look. "Just one?" "Yeah," Slade confirmed. "Looks like they're sending a small team to investigate." Nyla's mind raced. "All right, that could work for us. If they send a team, we can show them just enough crazy to convince them we're not a threat." "And if they don't buy it?" Slade asked, his voice serious. "Then we improvise," Nyla replied, her voice steady. "We're good at that." Slade chuckled despite the tension. "Improvise or die trying. Got it." They watched as the Coalition ship closed in, tension coiled in the air like a spring. This was it, the moment when their bluff would be called, and they'd have to dance on the knife's edge. "Captain," Theo's voice came through again, tinged with urgency. "I've got an idea. It's risky, but it might just give us the push we need." Nyla frowned, intrigued. "Go on." "If we enhance the neurostabilizer's output, we could create a field strong enough to affect their sensors," Theo explained, his voice crackling with excitement. "Make them think the nebula's getting worse, force their hand." "More mad science?" Slade quipped, raising an eyebrow. "I like where this is going." "It's risky," Theo warned. "Could burn out half the ship's systems if it goes wrong." Nyla considered it, weighing the risks. "Do it, Theo. We're already on borrowed time." "Understood. Give me a few minutes," Theo replied, the comms cutting off. Nyla turned to Slade. "Get ready. If this works, we'll have to move fast." Slade nodded, the tension in his shoulders showing. "Let's hope the universe is feeling generous today." They waited, the seconds stretching into infinity. Then with a jarring hum, the ship's systems flared to life, Theo's concoction flooding the air. "Here we go," Nyla muttered, gripping the armrests of her chair. The Coalition ship paused, its sensors undoubtedly lighting up with false readings. Nyla held her breath, willing them to take the bait. "Captain," Slade said, watching his monitor, "they're pulling back." A wave of relief washed over Nyla. "Looks like they bought it. For now," Slade added, his voice cautious. "But we can't count on it lasting." "Then we make the most of it," Nyla said, determination threading her voice. "We've got to find a way out of this mess." As the Coalition ship retreated, Nyla allowed herself a small, grim smile. They'd turn the tide, if only slightly. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time in what felt like forever, hope flickered in the dark corners of her mind. Captain, Theo's voice called over the comms, breathless with exertion. Output is steady, but we can't maintain this indefinitely. Understood, Theo, Nyla replied. We're not out of options yet. Slade leaned back, exhaling slowly. Not bad for day's work, Cap. We might just live to see tomorrow. Maybe, Nyla said, though she knew better than to count her chickens before they hatched. But we've still got a hell of a fight on our hands. The nebula loomed outside, a swirling mass of chaos and confusion. But for the first time since they'd ventured in, Nyla felt like they had a fighting chance. They'd taken on the coalition and held their ground. Now all they had to do was figure out what came next. And for the crew of the barely functional, improvisation was where they excelled. As the coalition ship retreated, the crew of the barely functional let out a collective sigh that could have powered a wind turbine if only the universe allowed such things. Nyla leaned back in her chair, staring at the swirling colors of the nebula through the viewport. All right, folks. We've bought ourselves some time, but not enough to start planning vacations on a beach planet. Slade swiveled in his chair, a sardonic grin plastered on his face. I'm just glad we didn't have to fill out any paperwork for that little performance. I hate space bureaucracy more than I hate space itself, and that's saying something. I think we can all agree that's a hate we share, Nyla replied. But now we've got to focus on proving the coalition's got dirtier hands than a toddler in a mud pit. Theo's voice crackled over the comms, full of excitement and likely caffeine. I've been working on something that might just do the trick, Captain. A little something I cooked up while you were distracting them with your Oscar-worthy performance. Do tell Theo, Nyla said, a smirk playing on her lips. And please skip the science jargon. Pretend I'm a coalition officer and use small words. Right, Captain, Theo responded undeterred. I hacked into the nebula's data streams and found encrypted files. Files that point to coalition ships conducting unauthorized experiments out here. Experiments on sentient life forms, if you can believe it. Nyla sat up straighter, interest piqued. And you can prove it? Absolutely, Theo said, confident as ever. I've got all the data, timestamps, even audio logs of them lamenting their lack of ethics. It's like they were trying to win an award for villainy. Perfect, Nyla said, her mind racing with possibilities. We can use this to force their hand, make them rethink that little band they're so fond of. Slade chimed in, ever the realist. Assuming they don't just blow us out of the sky to keep it quiet. Well, Slade, Nyla said, smirking, if that happens, remind me not to invite them to my birthday party. Noted, Slade replied dryly. But seriously, Cap, how do we get this evidence in front of the right people without getting vaporized in the process? Nyla mulled it over, her mind clicking through scenarios like a malfunctioning slot machine. We need to broadcast it wide in real time. Make it so public they can't just sweep it under the rug. Theo, can you rig something up? Already on it, Theo said, excitement bubbling in his voice. I'm connecting to every comm boy in range. We'll be streaming to half the galaxy before they know what hit them. Nyla grinned, feeling the familiar rush of adrenaline. Good, let's give them a show that'll make our last performance look like amateur ire. The ship buzzed with activity, everyone moving with purpose. Theo's concoction still floated through the air, keeping their brains from turning to mush while they worked. Nyla couldn't help but feel a glimmer of pride in her crew, a motley band of misfits who somehow managed to hold it all together when the universe seemed intent on falling apart. Broadcast ready, Captain, Theo announced, his voice tense but upbeat. We go live in 3, 2, 1. Nyla turned to the camera, channeling her best we mean business look. This is Captain Nyla Ralston of the Barely Functional. We have evidence of coalition misconduct in the nebula, unauthorized experiments on sentient life. We're broadcasting this live to ensure transparency and accountability. Slade gave a thumbs up from behind the camera, his expression one of grudging admiration. Nice touch, Cap. Nothing says we're not screwing around like a live broadcast. Thanks, Slade, Nyla said, trying to keep her nerves in check. Let's just hope it's enough. The minutes stretched on, tension wrapping around them like an overly affectionate boa constrictor. Then the screen flickered to life, and Admiral Doncaster appeared, looking like he'd bitten into something sour. Captain Ralston, Doncaster said, his voice like gravel being ground between gears. What is the meaning of this broadcast? Just sharing a little light reading with the galaxy, Admiral, Nyla replied, her tone sweet enough to rot teeth. Thought everyone should be in on your little experiments. Doncaster's jaw clenched, but he couldn't hide the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. This is a serious accusation, Captain, one that could have severe repercussions. Severe for you, maybe, Nyla shot back. For the rest of us, just another Tuesday. The comms room fell silent, the weight of the confrontation settling over them. Finally, Doncaster spoke, his voice a mix of resignation and grudging respect. Captain Ralston, you've certainly made things complicated. That's kind of our thing, Nyla said, leaning back in her chair, a satisfied smile playing on her lips. Doncaster hesitated, then nodded. We'll review your evidence. If it checks out, we'll have to reconsider the ban. Good to hear, Admiral, Nyla replied, her tone casual. And if it doesn't, well, we'll just keep broadcasting until it does. With that, the screen went dark and Nyla turned to her crew, feeling the rush of victory. Looks like we've got their attention. Slade grinned, shaking his head. Only you, Cap. Only you could turn a dire situation into a diplomatic coup. Hey, Nyla said, shrugging. I had good help. Now, let's see if we can make this stick. As they waited for the coalition's official response, Nyla's mind spun with the possibilities. They were playing a dangerous game, but they'd managed to tip the scales in their favor, at least for now. Hours later, a message came through. Not from Doncaster, but from a higher authority within the coalition, someone who looked like they'd just been slapped with a cold fish. Captain Ralston, the new face on the screen said, voice clipped and official. The evidence you provided is compelling. The coalition has decided to lift the ban pending further investigation. Nyla allowed herself a moment of disbelief before grinning widely. Thank you for your swift action. It's appreciated more than you know. The official nodded curtly, clearly not used to giving ground so easily. We will be monitoring the situation closely. Of course, Nyla replied, her tone respectful but firm. We'll be on our best behavior. As the screen went dark once more, the crew erupted into cheers. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd turned the tables and forced the coalition to admit their wrongdoing. Slade clapped Nyla on the shoulder, his expression one of genuine admiration. We might just live to see another day, Cap. You pulled it off. Don't thank me yet, Nyla said, though her heart soared with victory. We've still got a ship held together with duct tape and good intentions. Theo's voice came over the comms, tired but jubilant. Captain, I just want to say this was one hell of a ride. Couldn't have done it without you, Theo, Nyla replied, meaning it. Now let's get out of this nebula before it decides we've overstayed our welcome. With the ban lifted and the coalition's fleets no longer breathing down their necks, barely functional turned away from the cursed nebula, engines humming with a newfound purpose. Nyla watched as the swirling chaos of the nebula faded behind them, feeling a strange mix of relief and anticipation. Core set for Summit Station, Slade announced, a rare note of optimism in his voice. Let's hope they've restocked the bar. Nyla laughed, the sound echoing through the bridge like a promise. Here's hoping, but first, let's patch up what we can and get some rest. We've earned it. As the ship sailed through the stars, escaping the nebula's madness and coalition's reach, Nyla felt something she hadn't in a long time, the thrill of a fight well won and the promise of whatever came next. For all their flaws and foibles, humanity had proven once again that they were a force to be reckoned with, and as for the barely functional, well, she might not be the fastest ship in the galaxy or the most reliable, but today she'd been enough. And sometimes, in a universe hell-bent on chaos, enough was all you needed. As the barely functional limped back towards Summit Station, its engines wheezing like an asthmatic pug, Captain Nyla Ralston allowed herself a moment to savor the victory. Coalition's tail tucked firmly between its legs, a neat little slap on the wrist. Public embarrassment does wonders for keeping bullies at bay, at least for a while. Feels good, doesn't it? Slade remarked, swiveling in his chair with a grin that could cut glass. Beating the odds. It's like we're in some kind of underdog movie. Yeah, except we skip the training montage and go straight to the part where we're horribly outmatched, Nyla replied, squinting at the blinking lights on her console that screamed for attention. And let's be real, our ship's more barely than functional. True, Slade conceded, tapping a screen that somehow made a sad beep. But we gave them one hell of a black eye, Nyla sighed, the weight of the recent escapades settling into her bones. Let's just hope they don't come looking for payback with a sledgehammer. The last thing we need is the coalition pissed and rearmed. Dr. Theo Vance, the ever-optimistic scientist who seemed to thrive on chaos, popped his head into the bridge. His eyes were wide, as if he'd been mainlining espresso. I've been thinking, well, there's your first mistake, Slade cut in, earning a withering glance from Theo. As I was saying, Theo continued undeterred, we should consider what this means strategically. We've shaken the tree, but we knew that going in. Now, how do we keep from getting flattened by falling branches? Good question, Nyla mused, turning her chair to face him. Maybe we could use this to our advantage. Rally a few allies, spread the word about Coalition's dirty laundry, and turn this into something more than just a fleeting victory. Slade snorted. You think anyone's gonna line up to stick it to the Coalition? They might if they think there's a chance for change, Theo said, his voice filled with the kind of misplaced hope that only scientists and children possess. A chance for change, huh? Nyla echoed. Well, let's hope they're as optimistic as you are, Theo. Bob, the octopus-like coalition liaison who had reluctantly joined their crew under duress, though he'd never admit it, slid into the room, tentacles curling thoughtfully. He had that peculiar look on his face that meant he had something annoying to say. Captain Ralston, Bob began in his usual disgruntled tone. Might I remind you that while your actions have indeed disrupted coalition operations, you've also positioned yourself as a target of considerable interest. Yeah, I kind of figured, Nyla replied dryly. But Bob, when have we not been on their radar? At least now we're giving them something to think about other than their navel gazing. Bob's tentacles wiggled, a sign she'd come to interpret as begrudging agreement. I suppose it's commendable in a reckless sort of way. Theo clapped his hands, an odd display of glee. That's practically a compliment from Bob. We must be doing something right. Or incredibly wrong, Slade muttered, leaning back in his chair. Still, I'll take it. As they approached Summit Station, the outline of the massive structure came into view, a reminder of the bureaucracy they'd shaken up. The lights of the station blinked steadily, like a lighthouse guiding in wayward ships, or perhaps more like a warning beacon. Comms incoming, Slade announced, fingers dancing over the console as he patched it through. Looks like someone wants a word. Admiral Duncaster's face appeared on the screen, his expression more restrained than before, but still holding that perpetual sireness. Captain Ralston, I trust your journey has been educational. Let's call it enlightening, Nyla replied, matching his formal tone with a hint of sarcasm. We've learned a lot, like how not to trust a coalition officer any further than we can throw them. Duncaster's eye twitched, an involuntary tell she found endlessly amusing. The coalition is interested in opening diplomatic channels. Your evidence has stirred considerable discussion. Discussion or damage control, Nyla quipped, unable to resist. Either way, it's a start. The Admiral cleared his throat, a sound like gravel rolling over steel. We're willing to consider lifting the ban on independent operations in the nebula, provided you agree to oversight. Ah, oversight. The coalition's favorite word, Slade chimed in, not bothering to hide his disdain. A little more red tape to add to their collection. Think of it more as insurance, Duncaster replied, his tone smoothing over like oil on water. To ensure mutual interests are protected. Nyla considered the offer, glancing at her crew. They'd achieved more than they'd ever expected. Hell, they'd even managed to make an ally out of an alien bureaucrat. Maybe there was hope after all. Fine, Nyla said, after a pause pregnant with potential rebellion. We'll abide by your oversight, but don't expect us to bow and scrape. The Admiral's lips twitched, perhaps the closest he'd ever get to a smile. I wouldn't dream of it, Captain. Welcome back to Summit Station. With the comms closed, Nyla turned back to her crew. Looks like we've made ourselves a little space on the chessboard. Theo nodded, his eyes still alight with ideas. It's a move in the right direction. If we can expose the coalition's actions, who knows what else we can achieve? And if they try to pull one over on us, Slade asked, eyebrow raised. Nyla's grin turned sharp. Then we remind them why they should have left us alone in the first place. Bob's tentacles twitched again, signaling his reluctant agreement. I must admit, Captain, your crew's tenacity is impressive. High praise indeed, Nyla replied, smirking. Now how about we get this heap of scrap back to the station and see if they've got somewhere to patch her up? As they docked at Summit Station, a sense of tentative peace settled over the crew. They'd managed to carve out a little piece of the galaxy where they could stand and hopefully make a difference. The station's docking bay was bustling with activity, engineers and technicians scurrying over to inspect the damage that was the barely functional. Their faces ranged from bemusement to outright horror, and Nyla couldn't help but laugh. Their ship was a mess, but it was their mess, and she wouldn't trade it for the world. Well, here we are, Slade said, stretching as he stood. Back in one piece, more or less. Less mostly, Nyla corrected, patting the console affectionately, but definitely in spirit. Theo, already buzzing with ideas, began talking about his next experimental concoction designed to stabilize the mind after prolonged exposure to cosmic anomalies. Nyla figured she'd let him go on, if only because his enthusiasm was infectious in a world that often felt lacking. So what's next? Slade asked, watching as a group of engineers began to weld a particularly precarious panel. Nyla shrugged, feeling the weight of potential hanging in the air. We keep moving forward, Slade. One crisis at a time, right? Sounds about right, he replied, his grin wide and unrepentant. As they settled into the somewhat dubious safety of Summit Station, Nyla took a moment to reflect on their journey. They had faced down impossible odds and come out on top, if only temporarily. But it was a step in the right direction, and sometimes that was all you needed. The barely functional might have been a joke of a ship, but today it had served as a reminder that even the most unlikely of heroes can make a difference. In the grand scale of the universe, they were small, but their actions had ripples that would echo through the stars. And as for Nyla, she had rediscovered a part of herself that had been buried beneath the cynicism and survival instincts, the belief that, despite everything, they could change the galaxy, even if it was just one small battle at a time. As the crew disembarked, joking and jostling one another, Nyla allowed herself a moment of quiet pride. They weren't just a crew, they were a family, bound by shared struggles and the knowledge that they made it through together. Ready to raise a little more hell? Slade asked, falling into step beside her. Nyla chuckled, feeling the weight of the universe settle comfortably on her shoulders. Always, she replied. Let's see where this crazy ride takes us next. As they walked into the bustling corridors of Summit Station, Nyla knew one thing for certain: they were just getting started, and with a crew like hers, the stars were the limit.